So
there now.
If you can, it's where the borders of Utah, Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico meet at right angles. If you look at a map, it's pretty obvious.
That's actually helpful. Okay, so looking at a map, it looks like the Navajo Nation and Ute Nation are around there too.
Exactly. So Phil grew up really close to multiple reservations, but the main way people connected was through their language, and Phil spoke Spanish. So to him, he was Spanish. But he made the decision to steer Rita and Raylene away from the language.
You know, I regret that I didn't learn my second language, which was Spanish, because my dad did not want me to have an accent. He did not want me to get the disrespect.
That sounds a lot like how your dad grew up.
I know, it does. Right down to the food on the table.
Comfort foods were enchiladas. Mom was a wonderful cook, and she loved to make tortillas and beans and chili and potatoes.
Rice.
When we visited her earlier this year, she made us an amazing chili. But it wasn't until Rita's daughter, Leslie, started traveling around the Navajo Nation for work and brought her along that she actually ever wondered about her own ancestry.
I'll never forget, we went to one of the pueblos, and just, I felt such a connection to that area. Later, when I started doing research for
So
my
how are we getting
DNA
back?
and found out where my family
Okay,
lived,
I figured you
we
would.
didn't live far from there.
So it's getting kind of
This
hairy.
idea didn't just come out of thin air. Like my dad, Rita was asked by people around her all the time if she was Native while she was growing up.
You know, many times they'll ask me, "Oh, what tribe are you from?" I go, "I don't know. I really don't know."
So Leslie, her daughter, went out to find answers, and she sent in a tube of saliva to Ancestry DNA, and then soon after, Rita sent in hers. And they were surprised by a lot of things in the results. It did show that they were Native American, but the biggest surprise came a few months later when, out of the blue, Rita got a message from my mom explaining that it looked like she and my dad were related, and would she mind answering some questions.
And I said, "Sure." You know, I said, "I don't know if I can help you much, but certainly." And she said,
Is that a
"Well,
house
we're a
buried?
little bit confused because we
No,
have
that's
this one
okay.
connection with someone, and we're not sure if it's father, uncle, whatever, but he has initials PM." And I go, "Huh? Yes? Okay." I said, "That's my dad." And that's how we decided that she was talking about my father was your dad's father.
It was a lot to process. Rita told Phil first.
He says, "You know you got
Little bit.
son?" I said, "What?"
Tried to turn radius in
I didn't.
I like slicking the ice on the way back.
But
I don't know
I
how
had
close
to
it was
tell
to the
Dad,
ice.
you know, DNA does not lie. I said, the reality is you do have a son. And I think it took him a little while to just grasp the whole magnitude because he was young when it happened.
How young are we talking here?
Like a teenager. And remember, this man is now in his late 80s. Imagine trying to recall a single night out when you were a teenager 60 years later.
I can't even remember last year.
No, me neither. But eventually, Phil did remember enough.
Must not have been a good time.
The story goes that it's 1951, Phil is 17, and he just left home and was headed out to Denver to look for work. And he ends up in a bar somewhere along the way where he meets a tall woman. He said she looked Indian, but not Navajo, like the ones that he'd grown up around in New Mexico. He guessed Apache, but the details are very fuzzy.
We had been drinking a little beer a bit. Both of us. She was 19, I think.
The whole night, actually, is pretty blurry.
Clearly.
And I never seen her again. I don't remember her saying that she lived in Salt Lake.
A few months later, he gets a maintenance job at an Air Force base and ends up in the Army. A few years after that, in his early 20s, he meets a woman named Martha Archbeck, and they get married. They had Rita and Raylene, and they they stayed together their whole lives.
Okay, when does Bear come back into the story?
Well, after finding Phil and establishing the connection, my parents got on a video call to meet everyone. At first, it was just Rita, Ray, and Martha, their mom, and everyone was pretty emotional. I mean, my dad had been waiting for this moment for most of his life.
They saw me on FaceTime and they all kind of held their breath and they weren't shocked. They just couldn't believe it, but it was right there. And then Dad came into the picture and he saw me. And we both looked at each other.
I guess I look a little bit alike.
They look exactly alike, straight down to their hands. I mean, people always say my dad has like bear paws for hands.
We put our hands on the screen and they were exactly the same. Every part, every line, every part was the same.
I told him, I said, you know, sweetheart, sometimes God will use someone to let us know where we have lost treasures. And I said, and we found one treasure, and it was you.
That was Martha, Phil's wife. And this is amazing for a number of reasons. For one, Martha is not my dad's biological mom. And she was so warm and welcoming and accepting and loving.
Yeah, you can really hear that in her voice.
She must have had other kids.
So the call, as you can tell, goes very well. My sister and I were in college at the time, but we flew out for a family reunion of sorts. My dad was 66 years old when he first met his dad in person, and Phil was 83.
How did that go?
As soon as we got to Cortez, where Phil and Martha lived, it was emotional.
Martha immediately started crying as soon as she saw me. And I saw Dad, and I just went over and we started hugging each other.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, my dad was obviously crying and a little bit giddy. And when he first went out there, they spent a little time on their own, and they both love art. And so they stopped at this little craft stand on the side of the road near one of the reservations. And my dad kept going up to everyone that was browsing and saying, "This is my dad."
So, I know. Most of them said that. It looks like.
All in all, the visit went better than any of us could have hoped. And not only did they practically look like twins, their lives had some really strange similarities. Like, both had military service, both were prison guards, handymen, fishermen, gardeners, and they were both raised by Spanish-speaking families.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah, there was really one big way in which Phil's and my dad's life was different. Phil has never known or identified as Indian.
Wait, what do you mean?
Well, he grew up in a Spanish-speaking family, and when we asked him and Martha about being native, they said they were a little Spanish, and the discussion just kind of ended there. So any questions that the family had had on their past came from the daughters.
Oh, so your dad spent so much time connecting with his American Indian heritage. How did that make him feel?
You know, I think he was just so happy to find his dad and his family that he really hasn't focused on that. And I wouldn't trade our story for anything, but at the same time, it was this final confirmation that even though we feel so connected to our American Indian roots, we won't be able to prove tribal affiliation. There won't ever be an official built-in community for us to connect with that cultural heritage.
That really hits hard. And when you look back at how many people could have stories like your dad's, and like Phil's, during the time of closed adoptions, there could be so many people like you who have this heritage and can't claim it.
Yeah, it's a little think about. Like,